So we have one more open evening before we close for the summer. It will be on Tuesday, July the 20th. That's changed from the usual date. And it'll feature Ramis Kent, who is an African-American permaculture designer and teacher, recently returned from Detroit, where he's been conducting a design course described as Ground Zero in the transformation of post-industrial urban America. And Ramis will talk about the challenges of introducing this approach in a deprived urban setting. So that's Tuesday, July the 20th, last open evening for this season. That open evening is part of our final course of the academic year, Gaia's Garden, Summer in the Schumacher Grounds, which offers participants the opportunity to learn practical skills in the company of innovative practitioners in our area, such as Martin Crawford's agroforestry and Nick Gooderham's no-dig horticulture at School Farm. It runs from the 18th to 22nd of July. Further details on our website. Last announcement, courses start again in September, when we have Zen practitioner Ed Brown from California on awakening our relationship with food, a course on creativity and social innovation. And we also have Alistair McIntosh on community empowerment and land ownership. These are short courses, so there's no open evenings associated with them. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce an old friend and great supporter of the college, Rupert Sheldrake, who many of you know of. He's one of the most eminent scientists of our times. I don't think that's an exaggeration. And his work is groundbreaking and pioneering, as you'll see, and has the potential, hopefully one day, to completely change the way science is done and the way our society relates to nature. He's written many, many books. He's currently the Perrott Warwick Senior Researcher in Psychical Research, appointed by Trinity College, Cambridge, where he was also a Don many years ago before he went to live and work in India. This summer, Rupert is going to be leading a workshop in Canada in August in British Columbia on his work, and if you want to find out more, visit his website. I've written up the address there. I just want to say that Rupert has been coming to the college now for 20 years. I remember meeting Rupert on, I think, the third or fourth course, and we had a fantastic and deeply enlightening time. I think Rupert has transformed my understanding of nature as a biologist radically, and has done so for many people around the world, and he's going to do that for you tonight, I can guarantee it. And he's going to talk about animal telepathy, particularly based on his book, Dogs That Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home. So, a big welcome for Rupert.
Well, thank you, and it's a real pleasure to be here again. For those of you who've looked on the website and saw my talk was called Mind and Cosmos, I apologize for any false pretenses. The title of the talk's actually made up at the last minute, and Schumacher College filled in the blank with Mind and Cosmos, which Stefan assures me covers everything. So I'm in fact going to be talking about animal telepathy. This is a subject I've been doing research on for 20 years, and I have a vested interest in doing it this evening. This I regard as, like, for me, this is Schumacher College is like home. It's home territory. And I'm just starting a completely new aspect of my research on animal telepathy involving cats. And it's something where I need help from people who keep cats, dogs, or other animals. And I'm just guessing that many people in this room have cats, dogs, or other animals and might be able to help. So at the end, I'll explain how you could help with this project, and this is the first time I've talked about it in public. Now, animal telepathy deals with a taboo topic. Telepathy is a peculiarly taboo subject in our society. It's a peculiar subject to do research on because if you talk to most people have no problem with it. They say, oh, that happens to me all the time. My dog knows when I'm coming home. I always know when my partner's going to ring, and I know that it'll be her on the phone, that kind of thing. In the real world, most people have no problem with this, But in the academic world, and especially the scientific world, it's a taboo. You're not meant to talk about it. You're not meant to take it seriously. You're meant to pretend you don't believe in it. And this is a very peculiar situation. I mean, sometimes people say to me, why do you waste your time trying to prove what people already know? And in a sense, I am trying to do that. I'm trying to prove what a lot of people already know. Because within the scientific world, there's a culture of denial. There are also militant organized skeptic groups who see it as their job to serve as scientific vigilantes and to try and suppress any positive findings about telepathy. Now, I think the reasons for this taboo go back to the Enlightenment and even before, when at the age of Enlightenment, intellectuals in Europe and elsewhere decided they were on the side of science, reason and progress as opposed to religion, superstition, and all the things that held humanity back. And telepathy and psychic powers in general got classified as superstition, things that only stupid, ignorant people believe in. And that's why most people with university degrees will, at least in public, at least with people they're not sure about, pretend they don't believe in telepathy, because to believe in it means you're uneducated, stupid, and part of those who've not been touched by the spirit of the Enlightenment. Now, these are social taboos, and I'm not going to speak more about them this evening. I'm just going to talk about the science. But I have to mention this because this affects the fact that very little research is done on telepathy. There's more in Britain than anywhere else in the world, and there's probably about 5 people in Britain doing research on this subject. There's 4 or 5 universities where they have modules on parapsychology, which is more than the rest of the world combined. So Britain is ahead of the rest of the world, but in a tiny, tiny field where there's hardly any research because this taboo is extremely powerful. There's no funding for this research from government bodies and so forth. Anyway, enough of the social background. What I'm trying to talk about this evening is telepathy in animals, and this is part of a project which through animal research, I hope to show that telepathy is normal, not paranormal, natural, not supernatural. One of the reasons for the taboo is that people are afraid that if telepathy exists, it'll mean you have to believe in God, and then the Pope will be in England on the next plane, and all the... So people are desperately afraid of this because they think it will mean you have to believe in God. Well, I do believe in God, and some parapsychologists don't believe in God. They're atheists. Some Christians and Jews believe in telepathy, some don't. It doesn't really correlate very well with religion. It's a separate variable. And so whatever your views on God are, the telepathy is a separate question. And so, again, what I'm arguing is that telepathy is a normal part of animal communication. It's the way animals communicate with each other at a distance. Now, groups of animals have bonds between them. And part of my theory of telepathy is that social groups have social fields. There's a field linking together members of a group. You see this most clearly with flocks of birds, like starlings, when the whole flock can turn almost simultaneously without the birds bumping into each other. Now, how do they do it? It's not just by looking at neighbours. It happens too quickly. The latest research, based on a detailed study of starling flocks in Rome, this research was only published last week in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, shows that the members of the flock are linked up almost instantaneously and behave as one, as if with one mind. This is what you actually see, but they've proved it by taking very rapid video films, slowing it down, analysing it in huge detail. And the paper is called Scale-Free Correlation in Starling Flocks. Scale-free correlation, what it means in ordinary English, is that the birds behave together as one, however big the flock, a flock of 100 or a flock of 2,000, they're all linked together. In each case, they behave as if they've got one mind. That's not my phrase, it's the phrase used in this paper in the Proceedings of the US National Academy of Sciences. Now, I think that the field through which these effects take place, the field that links members of a social group, is an actual field and is a means through which communication can pass. Just as a magnetic field can affect the way iron filings line up, so the field of the group can affect the way the birds line up. They're responding to a field of the group. I think all animal groups have fields. Flocks of birds, schools of fish, herds of deer, and termites, bees, wasps, ants, the social insects, and of course human beings. We have family fields. A football team has a field that enables them to work together more or less well, not very well in the case of the England team. Each social group has a kind of field, and we're all part of different social fields. Now, this is part of a theory about social organization, and these fields are what I call morphic fields, and they have a built-in memory. But that's not the point of this evening. The point is that through being linked in a field, members of a group are connected together. In the case of starlings, they fly together in a coordinated way. But many animal groups split up at one time or another. For example, wolves in a wolf pack are all bonded to each other, but when the cubs are young, the cubs are left behind in the den, usually with a babysitter, while the adults go out hunting to bring back food to feed the young. And in northern Canada, they can range over hundreds of miles when they're hunting. What I'm suggesting is the field that links the cubs to the adults doesn't break when the adults go away, it stretches. It's like an invisible elastic band that continues to connect them, even at a distance. And so changes that happen to the adults could be felt by the cubs and vice versa. That, I believe, is the basis of telepathy. It happens between members, bonded members of social groups, and enables them to keep in touch at a distance. Now, with animals, and indeed with people until recently, it was the only way they could keep in touch at a distance. Until the invention of telephones and modern telecommunications, the only way a person could know when someone they were close to was sick or ill or dying or needed them was by telepathy. And in non-industrial cultures, this is completely taken for granted. I lived for years in India, and most people in India just totally accept this. And in Africa, anyone who's lived in Africa has wonderful stories about how people could know what was happening by telepathy. And here in England, there are plenty of these stories too. And we now have telephones, and oddly enough, telepathy has evolved along with the telephone, as I'll talk about later. And the commonest kind of telepathy in the modern world is telephone telepathy, where people think of somebody who then rings and say, "That's funny, I was just thinking about you." So, because I think telepathy is a normal means of communication among animals, I looked first at the natural history of telepathy. Not many naturalists have studied telepathy in the wild, but there's a wonderful book on this by an American naturalist called William Long. The book's called How Animals Talk. And it's recently reissued with a preface by me. It was last in print in 1919, but it's the classic work on the subject, and he showed by detailed observations that wolves can remain in touch telepathically over great distances, and also that telepathy is one of the components in the spreading of alarm. For example, in flocks of caribou, if one of them sensed danger, the others could pick it up even if they were beyond the range of the normal senses. He thinks that alarm can spread through groups telepathically, and this is one of the bases of panics. Panic can involve a collective contagion, which doesn't necessarily depend on being within the sensory range of others who are panicking. So there's not much study on wild animals, but the ones that it's easiest to study are domestic animals. These are the animals we know best. And many people live with dogs, cats, or other animals and know them extremely well over many years. So I thought this was the best place to begin, partly because from my own experience and friends and family members, I'd heard a lot of stories that suggest that animals can pick up human thoughts and intentions. And partly because doing research on pets is something quite easy and inexpensive to do. Because this is a taboo area of science, there's no big money rolling in for research on telepathy. So one of the things one has to do is design really simple, inexpensive experiments. Well, the first thing I did was collected stories from people who keep animals, including police dog trainers, blind people with guide dogs, jockeys, horse trainers, pet shop owners, vets, and pet owners. And I asked people if they'd noticed anything that suggested these animals had the ability to pick up thoughts or intentions. I've got now more than 5,000 of these reports, and they're classified on a database on the computer. And when you classify these stories, they fall over and over again into particular categories. There's a kind of natural history emerges from looking at these stories. Some scientists think that one shouldn't pay attention to what they call anecdotes. And I heard this so often that I looked up the word anecdote in the dictionary to see what it meant. And what it means is from the Greek roots an ekdotos. An means not, ekdotos means published. An anecdote is an unpublished story. As soon as it's been published, it stops being an anecdote by definition, and in the scientific literature it turns into a case history. Most of medicine is based on anecdotes, but they're called case histories as soon as they're published in medical journals. As far as I'm concerned, the plural of anecdote is data. If you have lots of anecdotes about the same kind of thing, a pattern emerges, not necessarily of what the pets really do, but certainly of what people believe they do. And the categories of telepathy we had were quite a number of them. For example, many cat owners find that their cat seems to know when they're planning to take it to the vet and disappears. And we heard so many of these stories, we did a survey of all the vets listed in the North London Yellow Pages. 64 out of 65 vets said that they frequently had a problem with people cancelling appointments because the cat had disappeared. And the one exception said they'd given up an appointment system for cats because this happened so often. Some people with dogs find that their dog knows when they're planning to take it for a walk. Now, of course, if they get up and pick up the lead and say walkie or something like that, nobody thinks that's at all odd. It's obvious the dog can read body language and so forth. But in some cases, people would be sitting, working, and think, oh, this is such a boring task I'm doing on the computer. I think I'll just take the dog for a walk. And seconds later, the dog bounds into the room very excitedly. We've done actual experiments on this with a woman who had 5 dogs in Lincolnshire. We shut the dogs up in an outhouse, an outbuilding. We filmed them on videotape, and then at randomly selected times, she thought about taking them for a walk for 5 minutes before actually doing so. And on the video, you can see during this 5-minute period, before that, the dogs are just lying around doing nothing. And during this 5-minute period, they gradually get more and more alert until when she finally enters the door, they're all sitting in a semicircle around the door waiting for their walk. So a lot of these things can actually be tested quite simply using inexpensive apparatus like camcorders. Some people have found that cats respond to their calls. That I think it's only women I've heard these stories from. Most men, if they want to call in a cat at night, sort of bang feeding bowls or rattle cat food or something. But quite a number of women have found that instead of doing that or going out and shouting the cat's name, they can just sit quietly, willing the cat to come in, and within a few minutes the cat trots into the room, obediently obeying their call. We also have stories the other way around where cats can influence people telepathically. A lot of people with cats have found that if they live in a house without a cat flap, they sometimes find that, as if under post-hypnotic suggestion, they get up, they walk to a window and open it just as the cat trots in at the bottom of the garden, like those infrared garage opening things. The cats sort of beam their intention to get in without having to be kept waiting. Then there are quite a number of cases where dogs or cats or other animals have known when their owner has died or had a serious accident. For example, a couple who lived in St Albans went on holiday to Ireland. The neighbours were looking after their dachshund. And then one night, at 2 in the morning, the dachshund started howling and behaving with signs of extreme distress. And they thought it was sick, but there was nothing wrong with it. They didn't know what to do. They couldn't calm the dog. And the woman rang the next morning from Ireland to say her husband had died of a sudden heart attack at 2 o'clock in the morning. So now we have more than 100 cases of dogs that do that. And This is something that happens to people too. One of the most dramatic kinds of telepathy is knowing when someone's died, either seeing an apparition of them or feeling their presence or just knowing. Now, obviously, this is an area of psychical research where it's not possible to do controlled experiments. You can't ask people to die at random times while their dog is being videotaped. So we have to rely here on spontaneous cases. But one of the commoner claims that pet owners have is that their dog or cat knows when they're coming home. The dog or cat goes and waits at a door or a window when the person's on the way home. About 50% of dog owners in a random household sample that we did in both Britain and America say that their dogs anticipate arrivals of a member of the family. Sometimes it's only a minute or two before, in which case they could have simply heard a car, the crunch of car wheels on the gravel, footsteps in the street. But in many cases it's 10 minutes or more before the person comes home. Then you'll think, well, this is just a routine thing, a matter of random routine timing. But that's not so. Some people have non-routine jobs. They come home at unpredictable times. The people at home know when they're coming because of the dog. I have more than 50 accounts from women who say that their husbands work irregular hours as lawyers, taxi drivers, or whatever, and come home at irregular times. They always know when the husband's on the way because the dog waits at the door, so they start cooking the meal so it's hot on the table when their husband arrives. Lucky men. I've only got one case of a man doing something in response to a dog for his wife, and in that case he made her a cup of tea. Better than nothing. There are many of these cases. Many of them seem to involve, not to involve either the people at home knowing and giving clues to the dog, not routine, not familiar car sounds, because many cases are when people travel by bus, train, or other public transport, or when they come by unfamiliar vehicles. So here's a case where one can actually do experiments, and I've done a lot of research on this. We do experiments where we film the place the dog waits. We have the person go at least 5 miles away. They come home at a randomly selected time that they don't know in advance. And to avoid familiar car sounds, they travel by taxi. Now, the most expensive aspect of this research are the taxi fares. And we use a different taxi every time. What we found in these experiments is over and over again, the dogs go and wait at the door when the person's on the way home. And in the most sensitive dogs, they start waiting when the person decides to come home before they've even got into the vehicle. Now, I've done a lot of experiments on this. They're published in peer-reviewed journals. The results are summarized in my book, Dogs That Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home. And I have here a video showing one of these experiments, so you can actually see it for yourself. Now, the one thing I have to tell you about this video is that the dog, JT, lives near Manchester, JT is now dead. And JT is a British dog, but the film was filmed for Austrian television, so the soundtrack's in German. But I'll tell you what's going on in case your German's not up to speed. But don't worry, it is an English-speaking dog. And we'll see now this experiment. Basically, there's Pam. Can you see all right, or maybe I should draw this curtain?
It has a drawstring.
Okay. I don't like them totally closed. Is that all right? Okay. Is that all right? Or I could draw them more if you want. Is this all right?
That's fine.
Okay, off we go. So Pam's speaking.
Taxi, mit dem Fahrrad, mit dem Auto von Freunden oder auch zu Fuß zurückgekommen. Es war eine Zeit intensiver Forschungsarbeit. Jeden Tag in der Früh habe ich mit Rupert Sheldrake telefoniert und wir haben vereinbart, welches Experiment wir heute durchführen. In dieser Zeit habe ich 44 Experimente gemacht, von denen 38 bewiesen, dass JT genau zu dem Zeitpunkt reagierte, zu dem ich mich auf den Nachhauseweg machte. Die paar Male, die er nicht reagiert hat, hat er entweder gefressen oder wurde von einem anderen Hund abgelenkt.
The other times that he didn't, he was either eating or there was a dog distracting him or something happening.
Wir wollen es jetzt genau wissen und machen die Probe aufs Exempel. Ein Experiment mit 2 Kameras. Eine Kamera wird im Wohnzimmer der Eltern aufgestellt, in dem auch JT bleibt, wenn Pam das Haus verlässt.
So an experiment with 2 cameras. And one camera films the dog in Pam's parents' flat where she leaves it, and the other films Pam as she goes around. And she doesn't know when she's coming home. They're synchronizing the cameras.
Es ist 11 Uhr Vormittag. Das Experiment beginnt. Weder die Eltern zu Hause noch Pam wissen, wann sie zurückkommen wird. JT auch unter diesen Bedingungen reagieren, Pam am Fenster erwarten. Wir begleiten Pam in das nahegelegene Städtchen Ramsbottom. Nur wir kennen den Zeitpunkt der Rückkehr. Selbst der Kameramann, der mit JT zu Hause geblieben ist, weiß nicht, wann wir zurückkommen werden.
Neither Pam nor the cameraman at home nor her parents know when she's going home.
In der Zwischenzeit daheim bei Pams Eltern. JT liegt nach wie vor bei den Füßen von Pams Mutter und zeigt keine Zeichen von Unruhe.
So meanwhile, JT stays beside the feet of Pam's mother and shows no signs of restlessness.
Es ist kurz vor 13 Uhr. Die Hälfte der Zeit für das Experiment ist bereits abgelaufen. Das wissen allerdings nur wir. Denn, wie schon gesagt, den Zeitpunkt der Rückkehr halten wir nach wie vor geheim. Weder Pam noch ihre Eltern zu Hause wissen, wann wir zurückkehren werden. Ob der Versuch gelingen wird, ist nach wie vor offen. Niemand kann voraussagen, ob JT unter Testbedingungen wie immer reagieren wird oder ob Kamera und Scheinwerfer ihn irritieren. Nun wird es ernst. Es ist 10 vor 3. Unsere Redakteurin gibt das Zeichen für den sofortigen Aufbruch. Die Kamera zeigt die aktuelle Uhrzeit. Es ist 14:50 Uhr und 7 Sekunden.
So it's 10 to 3. She's been out for nearly 4 hours, and this is the randomly selected time she's going home. So telling her to go home now. And there's JT at the same time.
Okay, let's go.
Um 14 Uhr, 50 Minuten und 33 Sekunden. 11 Sekunden nach unserem kleinen Signal zum Aufbruch geht JT ans Fenster.
Oh.
Das Experiment ist gelungen. Allerdings wissen wir das zu diesem Zeitpunkt noch nicht. Um es für den Hund noch schwieriger zu machen, haben wir uns schon vorher entschieden, mit einem Taxi zurückzufahren, damit JT das Motorengeräusch von Pams Auto nicht erkennen kann.
So going in a taxi so JT can't hear the sound of Pam's car.
JT rührt sich zu Hause nicht mehr vom Fenster weg, während Pam im Taxi auf dem Weg zu ihm ist.
So Pam took 15 minutes to get home and JT was at the window all that
Dabei
time.
spielt es keine Rolle, ob Pam an ihn denkt oder nicht. Genauso wie in den Experimenten, die sie für Rupert Sheldrake mit ihm gemacht hat, lässt sich JT auch diesmal irritieren. Erwartungsvoll sitzt er am Fenster, als das Taxi vorfährt. Zugegeben, uns selbst hat das Ergebnis verblüfft. Erklärungen können wir Ihnen dafür keine anbieten. Wir erheben allerdings auch nicht den Anspruch eines wissenschaftlichen Experiments. Wir können Ihnen nur zeigen, was wir mit eigenen Augen gesehen haben. Wenn Sie selbst ähnliche Erlebnisse mit Ihrem Haustier haben, bitte schreiben Sie uns. Wir leiten Ihre Briefe an Rupert Sheldrake weiter und Sie werden somit Teilnehmer an den Experimenten auf der Suche nach dem 6. Sinn.
Okay, that's it. Well, cats do this too. Not as many cats as dogs, about 30% of cats as opposed to about 50% of dogs. Not necessarily because they're less sensitive than dogs, but some of them, including our own cats, I'm sorry to say, are just less interested. How many people here have dogs or cats or animals that anticipate returns? Well, that's quite a few in this room. Thank you. So you see, this is not a rare phenomenon at all. There's probably dozens of people in the Totnes area who have animals that do this. So this is a common phenomenon, and it must have been known to people for centuries, if not millennia. We've got examples of lambs that do this, reared on the bottle, chickens and geese kept as pets that have been raised from when they were very young, parrots, horses, and a few scattered examples of ferrets, rabbits, and guinea pigs that do this. We haven't got any examples of return anticipating snakes, nor of psychic goldfish. But all the animals that do this are mammals and birds, and they're ones that seem to the animals that form the closest bonds with people. Most dogs only do it for one person. A few do it for two. Very few, about 5%, do it for three. But normally it's the person they're most attached to. When my book, Dogs That Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home, was published, dealing with telepathy and the sense of direction and premonitions in animals, I got lots more letters from pet owners, and the most surprising ones were from owners of African grey parrots. It turns out that African grey parrots are extraordinarily sensitive to their owners' intentions and feelings. Dog and cat owners often say, if only they could talk. Well, some parrots can, and the results are extraordinary. I had an email from a young woman, an artist in New York State, who told me that her parrot, she'd been training it to speak English. At the time, it had a vocabulary of about 700 words, one of the highest ever recorded. It's currently 1,500. That her parrot picked up her thoughts and intentions and said what she was thinking about. She thought she was thinking, I must go and phone Rob now, and she went to look up his number in her directory, and the parrot said, phone Rob now. And many examples like that, and the most dramatic are when the parrot wakes her up. He sleeps in her bedroom. When he wakes her up by commenting noisily on what she's dreaming about. So this parrot actually puts into words, she told me, what she's thinking. I didn't know whether to believe this or not. It was off the end of the scale of anything I'd ever heard. So as soon as I could, I went to visit her. And I soon saw for myself, I set up a simple experiment right there, that this really did seem to happen. So she and I organized a series of experiments with this parrot, which you're about to see. We'll have to turn off the video at this stage because this is copyright and can't be broadcast in any way. In these experiments, there were envelopes with pictures selected from a list of words the parrot knows, randomly selected pictures. She was in one room and opened an envelope and looked at a picture. In another room on another floor, the parrot was filmed. They were both filmed to see whether the parrot would say words corresponding to the picture she was looking at. And she looked at each picture for 2 minutes. So what you're going to see now is some of the results of this experiment. Of course, we did hundreds of hours of this, so you're only going to see 5 minutes, but it will give you an impression. And the key thing is when the experiment starts, the only voice you hear is the voice of the parrot. Amy didn't say anything, the owner. Now, this is hard to believe for some people because it speaks so clearly. However, it does have an American accent. And we've put subtitles on to make it easier for English audiences to realize what's happening. So if we... This is a very, very remarkable case of animal telepathy. Incidentally, for those who are interested in the technical details, we've done full statistical analysis. You can find all the details of the hits and some misses, but overwhelmingly significant positive results in our peer-reviewed paper. You can find the text on my website. So This research is not unique. There are other parrots with psychic abilities. None has the same linguistic skills as Enkisi, but I'm currently working with another parrot owner in the United States whose parrot is showing extraordinary telepathic abilities too. And I think parrots are some of the most telepathic of all animals, which is surprising in a way because they've only been domesticated for a few generations. Some African greys are only second generation living in captivity with humans. Dogs have had tens of thousands of years, but it's all the more remarkable. And it's a puzzle as to why they should be able to speak at all, and not just speak, but speak meaningfully and actually process and understand human language. Now, humans show many of the same characteristics, and I started my work on human telepathy by doing the same I did with animals, collecting stories and looking at the natural history. Now, parapsychologists have done research on telepathy for many years, with overall positive and, I think, very convincing results, but they often use highly artificial experimental methods. They have people in the so-called Ganzfeld procedure, where people lie in dimly lit rooms with red lights on, with half ping-pong balls over their eyes, while people look at video clips in a different room, and they have to work out what people are looking at. Now, this is quite a good experimental procedure, but it's very artificial. I mean, very few people in real life lie around with half ping-pong balls over their eyes. And I was more interested in the natural history, the real-life occurrence of telepathy. I soon found that it obeys the same general rules with people as with animals. It happens between closely bonded people, members of families, close friends, lovers, husbands and wives, twins, siblings, close colleagues, therapists and clients, where there's been what they call transference or counter-transference, where there's a close emotional bond. For example, many mothers have found that they're telepathic with their babies, and I've done a study on lactating mothers in North London, breastfeeding mothers, because many mothers have found that when they're away from their baby, when they go back to work, even though they're still breastfeeding, or if they're away from the baby shopping or something, they feel their milk let down, their breasts start producing milk, and this is an oxytocin-mediated milk letdown reflex that's been studied by physiologists. It's a documented standard physiological response. It normally occurs when the baby cries. But when mothers feel this happen to them, when they're away from the baby, most mothers assume their baby needs them. And they go home or they ring home on a mobile phone. And they're very often right. I did a study with 20 breastfeeding mothers over a 2-month period of each. And we found that although there were some false alarms, most of the time they were absolutely right about when their baby needed them. We studied them and the baby separately and found that their milk letdown reflex coincided with the baby's need. There's many cases of human telepathy that involve death and distress. Again, very often with mothers knowing when their child's had an accident, even when the children are older. And women have many more of these incidents than men, in accordance with the general view that women are more intuitive. And the most effective telepathic pairs are often mothers and daughters. I'm not going to talk about all the different kinds of human telepathy. These are summarized in my book, The Sense of Being Stared At and Other Aspects of the Extended Mind. I review the various kinds of human telepathy there. The one I'm going to talk about now is the one I've done most research on, namely telephone telepathy. I said at the beginning that this is the commonest kind in the modern world. About 80% of people have had the experience of thinking of someone who then rings. Our surveys have shown that all over the world, women have this experience more than men. In most countries, it's about 95% of women who have this experience. The average of men is about 70%. There are national differences. The most sensitive men we found were in Argentina, and the least sensitive were in Britain. This phenomenon is very... how many people in this room have had that experience with phone calls, thinking of someone who then rings? Well, there you are. That's a big majority here, too. It's a very common phenomenon. And when I realized how common it was, I looked to see if any scientists had done research on it. The answer is they hadn't. Nobody had ever done any research on it. a lot of scientists or people with a scientific education will put forward the standard armchair skeptical argument. Most people in this room have probably heard it. They'll look sagely when you say you had this experience, and they say, oh yes, but it's just coincidence. You think about people all the time, and then one of them rings and you imagine it's telepathy, and you forget the millions of times you're wrong. They say that as if it's a complete explanation. It's a hypothesis. They might be right, but if you say, where's your evidence? They haven't got any. It's a pure speculation, an evidence-free speculation. And in science, you need evidence as well as a hypothesis. And there just wasn't any. So I designed an experiment to find out, to try and see what's really going on. In the basic experiment, if you think this happens to you, you give me the names of 4 people it might happen with, typically close friends or family members. You then sit at home by a landline telephone being filmed, no caller ID system. We pick one of the 4 people by the throw of a die, so it's a random choice. Ring them up and ask them to call you. So you're sitting there, the phone rings, you know it's one of these 4 people. Before you pick it up, you have to guess who it is. I think it's Mary. Pick it up, hello Mary. You're right or you're wrong. If you were just guessing by chance, you'd be right one time in 4, 25%. We've done hundreds of these videotaped trials, and the average hit rate is 45%, way above chance, highly significant statistically. And we've done trials where 2 of the callers are familiar and 2 of them are people, strangers, whose names you know but who you've never met. With the familiar people, the hit rate's over 50%. With the strangers, it's about the chance level. All this is written up and discussed in published papers, if you want the details. But what I'm going to do now is show you a film made a few years ago of one of these experiments. We did lots of these experiments, and then a TV company approached me and said, we'd like to do one of these experiments for TV. And I said, okay, but you could work with the people I'm working with. And they said, oh, no, we don't want to work with them. They're just ordinary people. This is TV. We need celebrities. So I said, all right, but you can't just have random celebrities. You've got to have people who know each other really well. And they rang me back a few days later and said, we've come up with the answer. The Nolan sisters. The Nolan sisters were an 80s girl band, and they're Irish, they're sisters. They know each other very well. They think of themselves as being in psychic communication. So we did an experiment with 5 Nolan sisters, and that's what you're about to see. If you look at the modern world, despite all discouragement, most people believe that they've had telepathic experiences. And interestingly, the most common kind of telepathy in the modern world is precisely one that's grown up alongside technologies. In other words, telepathy connected with telephone calls.
So many people tell stories of telephone telepathy that Dr. Sheldrake devised a test to see whether someone could predict who, out of 4 people, was calling them. The probability of being correct by guesswork alone was 25%.
We've now completed 1,000 of these trials, and the average success rate is 42%, which is hugely significant statistically. People certainly aren't right every time, but it's way above what you'd expect by chance.
So, is telephone telepathy real, or is it just a figment of the imagination? We brought one of the most successful girl bands of the 80s to London to find out. The Nolan sisters are one of the closest families in showbiz. At the height of their fame, they spent months on the road together, and most of them still live within miles of each other.
I'm Rupert Sheldrake.
But how well will they do in the telephone telepathy test?
Now, could you tell me all your names in order, please?
Yes, I'm Denise Nolan. I'm the most intelligent one here. I'm Maureen. She's just Maureen.
Hi, I'm Linda, and Denise is a liar.
I'm Colleen.
Colleen is the youngest, and I'm Anne, I'm the eldest.
Why do you say that?
Because I want people to say I look good for my age.
Maybe you don't. You don't.
Not really.
The first stage of the experiment is to decide which of the sisters will be the receiver.
So 4 of you are going to stay here. 1 of you is going to go to the hotel and try and guess which of the others is phoning. So we've got to pick the person to do that.
It's got to be Colleen.
Colleen is nominated by her sisters because she's the youngest. And while she's driven a mile away to the other location, Dr. Sheldrake allocates each of the other sisters a number between 1 and 4. For each trial, a throw of the dice will determine who will be the caller.
So we're going to start now with the first one. I'm going to throw the die. 2. There you are, Maureen. So you've only got 2 minutes.
Maureen's first up, and the rest of the group must leave the room to allow her to focus.
Let's let me think about her.
When the phone rings, Colleen will have to say who she thinks is calling before she picks up.
Right. Maureen. Maureen.
Yes! Oh, yes! Yes! Thank God for that. Thank you. Lovely talking to you.
Bye.
Bye. I knew she'd get it. Yes. Bloody hell.
Sorry.
But that could just be coincidence. Next up is Anne, the only sceptic among the sisters.
Denise. No, you're wrong.
With 4 sisters to choose from, if it's purely guesswork, Colleen should expect to be right 25% of the time by the end of the experiment.
Think of your favourite sister. The most talented one.
I'm not getting anything now. I don't want to be wrong. Linda. Linda.
Yes! Yes!
Good girl. You're not thick.
Thank you.
Oh, bye.
Thanks for calling. Bye.
Bye. Yes.
That's good, isn't it?
Halfway through, and Colleen is a long way ahead of the 25% expected by chance alone. Anne's number has come up 4 times, but for the previous 3, Colleen has guessed wrong.
Anne. Yes! Hooray! I knew you loved me, really.
3/4 of the way through, and Colleen's hit rate has reached over 40%. According to Dr. Sheldrake, this indicates there's more going on than simple guesswork.
Maureen or Linda, I think. Linda.
Yes! Yes! Oh my God!
I'm so impressed.
I'm scaring them now. They're backing out the room.
They should never have gone in there with you, love.
Fantastic. Thank you. Bye. Wow.
Colleen's final score is 50%, one of the highest of over 1,000 tests conducted by Dr. Sheldrake.
Anyway, well done. I think that was great.
Thank
Thanks
you.
very much.
I enjoyed it.
Well done, that girl.
Cheers! Don't block my face.
Okay. Good. Well, you too can take part in a telephone telepathy test, because I now have an automated version of this test running on mobile telephones. In this one, you only need 3 callers. You register on my website, sheldrake.org. You go to the online experiments portal, scroll down to the mobile telephone telepathy test, and you put in the names of 3 people you know well with their mobile phone numbers. What then happens is that the computer picks one of the 3, sends them a text message asking them to ring you at a landline number. You ring that number, it welcomes you to the number, it puts you on hold, you listen to music composed by one of my sons, and then the computer rings up the subject, that would be you if you're the person doing the test, And a message says, this is the telephone telepathy test. One of your 3 callers is on the line right now. Guess who it is by pressing 1, 2, or 3. You put them in an alphabetical order so you can remember who's 1, 2, and 3. And you guess. And then the line opens up and you get instant feedback. You see if you're right or wrong. And you can talk for up to a minute. It then cuts off because I'm paying for the call. Anyway, this experiment's now been running for a while. As we speak, people may be doing this test. You can do it anywhere, at home, you can be on a bus, you can do it in real life. This is one of my aims, to get science into the real world, so that you can do it under real-life conditions. And this test is working quite well. The average chance hit rate is 33% with 3 callers. It's running at an average of 43% at the moment, which is way above chance. It's not such a high excess over chance as in our previous experiments, but there we selected people who said they were good at this, who had it happen in real life. In this test, anyone can do it, and some of the people who do it are skeptics or people who've never had this experience in real life anyway. So the hit rate is lower, but it's still massively significant statistically. I gave a seminar on this research a couple of years ago at Google in Silicon Valley, the Google technical seminar. And incidentally, that's online on the Google website if any of your friends want to see it. And as a result of this, I've had a lot of interest in this from new media companies like Google, people who develop iPhone apps, and Nokia. I've given a couple of seminars to senior personnel at Nokia, the telephone company. They're all very interested in trying to develop applications based on this, which they'd launch as intuition training tests. And they think there'd be a huge interest among people. And I hope this will happen. I'm not going to make anything out of it, but not in this for the money. No one would be in telepathy research for the money. But whoever develops these apps might make some. And the reason they're interested is that all over the world people have these experiences with phones. These experiments, if they're done as apps for iPhones or for the Android operating system, the Google system, would make this kind of research possible anywhere. I now have a new telephone telepathy test that's being developed on a cloud computing system in America, and the first test should be happening within the next few days. At the moment, my system only works in Britain. But this work will soon go international, and is one of the ways in which telepathy, I think, can be widely recognized both in real-life anecdotal form and also through actual experimental research. Now, I'm running out of time very fast, so I just want to end by telling you what I'd like you to do if you've got a cat or a dog. What I'm doing now is launching a project on animal telephone telepathy. Because some animals, this is relatively rare. I don't know, maybe none of you have a cat or dog that does this, but I guess 1 or 2 might have, and you might have friends who have, so tell your friends. There are several people who have dogs and cats, and it's commoner with cats than dogs, that know when a particular person is calling. I first heard of this from the wife of a professor of musicology at the University of California, Berkeley. And she said that she always knew when her husband was calling because their cat, Whiskins, went to the telephone, and if she didn't answer it straight away, the cat would get really excited and it'd sit by the receiver, and if she wasn't there quickly, the cat would pull the receiver off and start purring into the receiver. But it only did this when it was her husband ringing, and he called at all different times of day from the university. It ignored calls from double glazing salesmen and others. So it was only when this person called, and it even did it when he was on field trips in South America or in Africa at completely unexpected times. And I should say telephone telepathy is a good way of testing the effects of distance. We've done some of these tests between people in Australia and Britain, as far away as you can get, and they work just as well, whatever the physical distance. What matters is the emotional closeness, not the physical distance. So I'm looking now for cats that know who's calling, or dogs. Some dogs do it, and some parrots do it. Some parrots announce by name the person who's calling. And what we want to do is, first of all, work out the natural history in more detail. So the first thing is, if you've had a cat that does this, or if you've got one now, or a dog, or a parrot, or even a ferret, or a guinea pig, or a rabbit that knows who's calling, let me know and tell me the story. My email address is sheldrake@sheldrake.org. So please email me, and if you know anyone who has these stories, let me know. The second phase, when we've worked out the kind of natural history, what people experience, is to do randomized experiments where we'll film the telephone receiver, and we'll have the owners ring at random times, and we'll have calls from people the cat doesn't know interspersed, and we'll see whether the cat really does respond under controlled experimental conditions to the person who's calling. And I think that if one can show that cats know who's calling, this would be a very good way of establishing the phenomenon. Most people already believe it, but there is this strong resistance in the scientific world. In public, most scientists who deny telepathy in public, or who pretend they don't believe in it in private after a glass or two of wine, will tell you that it actually happens to them. And they feel they have to maintain this facade in public. But the thing about cats and dogs is that no one's going to accuse them of cheating. And I think it will be much, much more credible if we can show that cats really do this. And there's already substantial evidence that they do. So if you're able to help with this, do please tell me your story. And even better, if you can help with experiments, let me know, and we'll try and set some up. They're very simple, they're not intrusive, and they will help the cause of this research. Okay, well that covers a kind of rapid overview of this subject of animal telepathy, and human telepathy is just the same kind of thing as animal telepathy. We're telepathic not because we're special and human, we're telepathic because we're animals like other animals, and we communicate with others telepathically, especially to do with emotional needs and wants. Telepathy is not primarily about communicating information. You wouldn't use this as a way of downloading large amounts of data or spreadsheets, but it's a very good way of knowing when you're needed, or when someone's in distress, or when someone wants to call you. It's mostly to do with emotional needs in people and in animals. And I think it tells us that we're interconnected with each other, much more than we might usually assume, and especially with those who we feel bonded to or close to. Our thoughts and intentions can affect dogs and people at a distance. And so how we think about other people, and including how we pray about other people, I think can indeed have an effect at a distance. So that's a summary of the evidence, and now we've got some time if you'd like to ask questions. I'm going to ask Stefan to pick the questioners.
Yes, gentleman in the blue shirt. Thank you very much. Can I ask, you've obviously related this to emotional bonds between animals and their owners, or
yes,
people and their owners in the pet state, and between people that have a strong emotional bond.
Yes.
Have you experienced instances where two people, for example, seem to have that sort of telepathic bond from moment one? You know, when they've initially come together.
Well, people can have
build?
There has to be a relationship, and there are cases where people can have a telepathic connection with someone they've just met. They can pick up their thoughts and so on, but they are in a relationship just through talking or being together. When it works at a distance, it's usually with people you already know and with whom you've established a bond. So you wouldn't expect it to work with a stranger you've never met. If you've met somebody and formed a strong connection with them, even if it's only one meeting, you might have something of this. But it does depend on establishing that link or connection.
Yeah. I'm very interested in this idea of the variables that actually enable the other side of the coin to operate humans, and how they work. I mean, I'm seeing from the experience of a friend of mine who is an animal healer, and apart from being psychic with people, she is psychic with animals, and obviously she doesn't have an emotional contact with them. She meets them just once, sits down with them, and what she normally does is to actually ask psychically the animal what something that only the animal and the owner understand. And she gets the most amazing results. Such things as one dog, and she said she didn't understand. He's got an image of carrots, and some noise from the dog saying yummy, yummy, yummy. And she thought, dog, carrots. It doesn't make sense. But stuck with it and saying, well, for some reason, I'm getting, to the owner, and I'm getting some experience with carrots here. And you know, oh, God, I love carrots. Walk around all day, like bones, and chews them and gnaws them. And she said this many, many times with me, and this is quite extraordinary. And I said to her she should be studied. I'll take her to a lab. But it's the other side of the coin. It doesn't need an emotional contact. And probably how this fits in and what variables actually exist in human responses.
Well, that's a good point. I think there's a category of people and who can form relationships with animals almost instantly and pick up stuff telepathically from them. And animal healers and animal communicators fit into this category. Not all of them are equally good, but it is a growth area, especially in California. People run workshops on how to become an animal communicator in one weekend. And I wouldn't trust all the graduates of these programs to give very accurate readings, but some of them can. And I think that this ability for particular people, unusual people, to form strong bonds with animals probably goes back a long way. In hunter-gatherer societies, the shamans are people who they act as a bridge between the human and the animal or natural world. And in hunter-gatherer societies, the shamans know what animals are doing, where you'd find animals to hunt, and that kind of thing. So I think there are some kinds of people who are able to do this with animals, forming fairly instant links. There are also people who can do it with people. Psychics or mediums are often telepathic with people they haven't met before, and can pick up things from their minds. I haven't actually studied these unusual people with these gifts because I prefer to concentrate on ordinary people. One reason is that skeptics accuse people who do it professionally as being frauds or charlatans who are just in it for the money. And as a matter of course in my research, I prefer to work on what I call the mysteries of everyday life. So I haven't actually studied these exceptionally talented individuals, and it may well be, it would be worth doing, but it's just not what I'm doing at the moment.
Do you know of any research on this?
No, I don't know of any research. As far as I know, I'm the only person in the world doing research on animal telepathy and kindred phenomena. Unbelievably, it's not as if no one's interested in this. Lots of people are interested in it. It's just that it's a taboo topic. It's not funded. The government feels that our tax money that's spent on biological research should go on genetically modifying crops, sequencing genomes. The idea that a tiny fraction of it should go on looking at psychic animals or animal communicators doesn't cross their minds, even though that would be much more popular than a lot of this much more expensive research that they pay for. So, no, I don't think so. This is a virtually unexplored field. And anyone in this room who wants to do research on it could do so, because there's virtually no competition. The experiments are really cheap. You can make major advances without a laboratory. It's a field that's a virgin territory for research, essentially.
Going back to the parrot, rather like if humans learn lots of foreign languages, that part of the brain sort of develops. Has anybody studied the brains of parrots as to whether they've got a more developed part that is why they're good at speaking or remembering?
I don't think they have. Of course, most people who've got parrots that speak don't want to have their brains dissected, but I suppose when they die, they could donate the parrot's brain to science. I've not heard of anyone doing that yet. But the best studies on parrots, on language use, were done with a famous parrot called Alex. There's a woman called Irene Pepperberg who studied for 20 years a parrot, an African grey called Alex. And Alex died a couple of years ago, and is the only parrot, I think, to have had an obituary in the New York Times. Because he became very famous in the scientific world. When Irene Pepperberg started working with Alex, she found that none of the scientific colleagues she had would believe that this parrot could use language meaningfully. They just said it's just parroting things. It's literally bird-brained. It can't possibly understand language. And Pepperberg bravely, and over many years, did a whole series of experiments with Alex, in which she showed he could use language abstractly. For example, he could learn colours like blue and red. And then she'd hold out a tray of objects that he'd never seen before and said, "Give me the blue one." And he'd bend over and pick up the blue one, showing that he could learn the word blue could be used abstractly to apply to any blue object. And he could also grasp the concept of present or absent. And so in a mammoth work she published with Harvard University Press called the Alex Studies, she documents 20 years of research with this parrot, which prove that it really did use language meaningfully. Her work with Alex was the inspiration for Aimee and her studies with Enkisi. She tried to learn from Pepperberg and Alex and try and go further, and she's gone a lot further. Alex's vocabulary when he died was 200 words. And as I say, Enkisi's is currently about 1,500. The highest number in the Guinness Book of Records is 800. And it's not just lots of words, it's sentences and meaningful use of language. And Aimee tries to get the Enkisi to use language meaningfully. When he learned the word water, for example, she'd show him water and pour water from one glass to another, so he learned what it meant rather than just saying the sounds. Now, they don't have the same differentiation of left and right hemispheres that we do. Their brains are much smaller than ours, and no one knows much about how African greys respond in the wild. They're highly social, as they live in flocks. They form strong bonds. But why they should be able to use language like this, why they should be able to produce the sounds and then understand them is a real mystery. It's a profound mystery, really. And again, there's very, very few people doing research in this area. Now, Alex died, Pepperberg's got another parrot, Aimee's doing research on parrots, but I think they're the only two people in the world. So the funny thing is, these areas which are really, really interesting are like the Cinderellas of science. And the money is poured into areas that lots of people aren't interested in at all. And it's a great shame, because if we looked at these things, I think there's a lot to learn.
Yes, Jean.
Have you thought of doing it the other way around to see whether we are as clever as they are? I mean, have you tried to learn cat or dog, or have you?
Well,
how could we experience their language? I mean, it seems very terribly one-sided at the moment.
Well, I think there are some. I mean, Dr. Dolittle. In the Dr. Dolittle books, does learn the language of many animals. And one of the siddhis that Patanjali talks about in the Yoga Sutras is knowing the cries of all creatures. There are people who do try to understand dog and cat. There are a few people, they're mostly people doing it not in universities, of course, but just because they're interested. And there are some people who've now identified quite a number of different barks in dogs and can actually interpret the barks as giving different messages. So there are some studies going on learning animal languages and interpreting them.
Yes.
That was a telepathic moment, because I put my hand up at the same time as Jean, and I was going to say that I had a Siamese cat that was very motherly, and my son was only just talking, and we were in the car, and he said, Muffy's the only cat in the world that speaks English. So he had a communication with her, and he understood her. So exactly what that was about. And equally, I have a dog who would like to speak, and you can see him struggling, because he can't bear emotions between people, because he can't talk about it. And he's had a couple of fits where he kind of boils over because he can't communicate.
It must be very frustrating for dogs. They form such strong bonds with people, and yet they can't really enter into it. It must be terribly frustrating to be a dog. Yes. And parrots do have the advantage that they can speak. But I have to say, I'd rather live with a dog than a parrot. Parrots are like spoilt 2-year-olds. They're really difficult creatures to live with. They're incredibly possessive and jealous. And I mean, it's a real trial living with a parrot. It's an act of dedication. Partly because they form such very strong bonds to their person, and they get extremely protective and jealous and so on, more so than dogs.
Doctor, another question.
Yeah. One of the anecdotes that springs to mind is my dog or cat is a good judge of character. So have you looked at that?
maybe
Dogs or cats as judges of character? Well, yes, in the stories we collect, we've got lots of stories where people gave examples of where the dog would growl when a particular person came past and it turned out they were up to no good. And yes, I think there's something about them enables them to read people's intentions.
Is that when the owner is present, the emotional contact is present, or is it just taking it off of someone that they haven't met?
Oh no, this is when some stranger they haven't met before comes by and they communicate to their owner, by growling or something like that. They don't like this person. And I mean, some dogs just growl at anyone, but others are more discriminating. They only growl at people who turn out to be really bad characters with sort of evil thoughts of one kind or another. So, I mean, one of the things that dogs do as domesticated animals is give us warning. They're guard dogs. That probably the first things they did when they were first domesticated, which the latest DNA estimates put the domestication of dogs as far back as 100,000 years. They're the oldest by far of the domesticated animals. Horses are about 5,000 years, cats about 7,000, cows, goats, sheep about 10,000. But dogs have been around far, far longer than any other animal living with humans. And probably their primary function was guarding, as guard dogs, giving warnings. And so giving warnings of when people are coming and giving warnings about what their intentions might be, I think is pretty basic in dogs' nature and the role they serve as companion animals of humans.
You still have a question?
Well, it was more a thought about about thought rather than speaking out loud. That you think thought of the animal or the other person. I've had very good interaction with both animals and people, and I first learnt that when I was in a culture where I couldn't speak the language. It was frustrating to speak, so just to be with the silence, and you do that with people. And more than twice I've had animals of friends come near their death and hadn't realised till afterwards, and through thought asked me to pray, and why I'm so absolutely sure it's been a prayer that isn't of my faith, but I do it, and I'm always in my head, I don't say this, but it's like I'm not saying it for me, I'm saying it for that particular, it was dogs, and it was only afterwards that I heard from the friend, and it was countries apart.
Yes, well, I think they can. I mean, some people can pick up their thoughts. It's more common for them to pick up our thoughts. And this is taken for granted by a lot of people who are very experienced with dogs. Barbara Woodhouse, who is the doyenne of dog trainers, in one of her books about how to train your dog, says that, remember, the dog is picking up the thoughts in your mind. She said, if you want a dog to do something, make a clear image in your mind. So the words don't really matter. Just make the clear image and communicate that image to the dog, and that's what it will react to. She doesn't say, maybe dogs are telepathic. She just takes it for granted that they are, and they're going to read the thoughts in your mind.
That's what I do now, and it's like, and I think this clearness helps. One of the thoughts clear, but also yours clear. So I think if you share with people, often it can be at night when it's quiet. And there's less interference from outside.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Two quick ones, but they might be long answers. One is, if people pick up on atmospheres when they walk into a room, and they can sense that instantly, have you had a chance to do experiments with animals picking up, if people know the emotional content? And the second one is picking up from what someone said earlier about not knowing people and then an attraction building up or whatever. Have you ever done any, or had there been any research done on blind dates, speed dating, love at first sight, where people just know and then 5-10 years later that it's still that knowingness is there?
Well, about animals picking up atmospheres, I mean, a lot of people say that their animals can pick up an atmosphere when they go into a room, and there's lots of stories of dogs getting distressed in haunted houses and horses shying when they pass a place where some terrible thing has happened. And some people are convinced that dogs or cats can see ghosts. But this is not an area you can do empirical research in very easily, because if the cat appears to be looking at something in the room, you can't actually prove it's looking at a ghost if the ghost's invisible to you. So it's a very hard area to do research. I mean, they picking up atmospheres, whether a room's happy or not. I mean, people do that too, and often when people are looking at houses they're thinking of buying, they say things like, it was a happy house or it had a gloomy atmosphere. Animals probably can pick that up too, but I don't know of anyone who's done any research on that. I don't know of any estate agents who have dog-approved dwellings. There's 9 out of 10 dogs regard this as a happy home. It would be a good sales line, actually. In terms of instant communication, the sort of instant connection and the speed dating thing, I don't know of anyone who's done that kind of research. So it would be very hard to say. And so I pass on that one. I don't know of any answers in that area.
My wife and I are from San Francisco, and we have been told to expect within the next 25 to 40 years an earthquake as large as the devastating one of 1906. Can we get an animal to help us with an earthquake warning?
Yes.
Yes. The simple answer is yes. In my book, Dogs That Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home, I have a whole section on animals giving warnings of earthquakes and tsunamis. And now, there's many, many cases documented since the time of ancient Greece of animals behaving strangely before earthquakes. And this is something I've been studying for the last 15 years. We did 2 surveys in California. We did surveys around Northridge, where there was the 94 quake, and around Santa Cruz, where there was the 1987 Loma Prieta quake, and found that many people in those areas had observed unusual animal behavior before these major earthquakes in California. And since then, I've been tracking most of the main earthquakes and tsunamis. For example, in the 1997 Assisi earthquake, I had an Italian research assistant at the time, and I'd asked her to go over to Assisi just a few days after the quake, and she did a whole series of interviews, and very, very interesting results that people had noticed strange behavior in animals up to a week before the earthquake in Assisi. For example, restaurant proprietors told her that they'd been losing business and complained to the city authorities because rats had come out of the sewers and were swarming over the terraces where people normally ate. And of course, no one wanted to have dinner outdoors on the terrace with rats running around. And so these were... there are many examples, and it's some animals just get excited, minutes before, but many do it hours or days before. The only people who've taken this seriously were the Chinese. In 1975, Chairman Mao initiated a new phase of people's science, where they, based on traditional Chinese folklore, they got peasants and workers to report if they saw unusual animal behavior. And they were able to predict several very major earthquakes and evacuate entire cities, largely based on animal predictions in the 70s and 80s. Now, they were ridiculed for this by Western seismologists who said this is just folklore, it's superstition, it's not real, earthquakes are a physics problem, have nothing to do with animals. It was terrible. Instead of saying, this is great, they've made an incredible discovery, they had contempt and ridicule poured upon them. And so now the Chinese scientists have given up doing it because Westerners just treat them with contempt, or at least if they do it secretly. I've been unable to find out any recent research from China on this. The tsunami that devastated parts of Indonesia, Sumatra and so on in 2005, that too was preceded by unusual animal behavior. So I think that this is something that happens quite commonly. It also happens before avalanches and before a number of other natural disasters. And during the Second World War, it happened before bombing raids. In Britain, British dogs and cats were warning, long before the air raid sirens went off, of German bombing raids. And I've done a survey in Germany that shows that German dogs and cats were warning of British and American bombing raids in Germany. So there's many, many cases where they know, and it's not just tremors in the earth, because bombing raids, you might say they just hear the plane, but it was too long in advance for them to have heard the planes and to have known where the planes were going. So animals seem to know there's a premonition that they can have, and this could be of great value. The Chinese found it so. And now with mobile phones everywhere and the internet everywhere, I'd been trying to persuade people responsible for earthquake and tsunami warnings to take this seriously. And in America, I suggested in California that they set up an animal-based earthquake warning system. You could have a toll-free number like 1-800-PET-QUAKE or something like that. Easy to remember number, and a website, and where people could report if they saw unusual animal behavior. And of course there'd be a background of false alarms, cats that were just sick, or possibly the odd hoax. But if you got a surge of calls from, say, Santa Barbara, you know that there might be something happening there. And the same would be true even in Indonesia and areas that are tsunami prone, because they now all have mobile phones, and it would be very easy to do this. Very much cheaper and much, much more effective than anything that's being done now. But believe me, the people involved, they simply won't do it because they're convinced that it's impossible, there's a taboo, it's a taboo, they don't want to look foolish. Then I tried to get it funded in America, the California one, set up privately with private funding. I approached the insurance industry. And I approached, first of all, the buildings insurance companies. And they said, oh no, they thought about it for a bit. And then they said, there's nothing in it for us, because even if you have a warning, you can't stop the building falling down. It wouldn't be a good investment. And so then I tried life insurance. And they said with California building codes, even the worst quakes result in only a few deaths. And, it wouldn't be cost effective. I mean, the most narrow kind of thinking. We're not talking much money. Anyway, I don't live there. Otherwise, if I were younger and lived there, I'd set it up myself. But it's, in Greece, in Turkey, in India, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, there's many places where this could work. And I hope it will. I think sooner or later people are going to set up these animal warning systems. And then they'd say, well, we don't understand how they do it. Well, it doesn't matter if we understand or not. If they do it, then we could just use the information they're trying to give us and work out how they do it later. I think it may be partly physical signs like electrical changes, but I think the evidence of the bombing raids, and some cases I've collected of IRA bomb attacks and other terrorist outrages, animals give warnings before terrorist bomb attacks in some cases, where they couldn't possibly hear anything or smell anything or know anything. It's somehow a form of premonition, which is a kind of precognitive thing. Somehow you know or feel in advance that something bad is going to happen, even without physical clues. This is a fascinating topic, and I'm currently doing research on premonition of telephone calls, and I have an online premonition audio test, which I invite you to take part in. It's free, it's fun, it takes less than 5 minutes, it's online on my website. But this is an area we don't understand anything about, really, and yet which could be of great practical interest, especially in relation to animals and earthquakes.
I think we'll have one more last question. Gentleman there.
I wonder whether you found any particular information from guide dogs and people that rely very closely on animals to physically guide them, to medically be alert for them, and so on.
Yes, we did I had a research assistant who, through the Guide Dogs for the Blind organisation, got in touch with guide dog trainers and guide dog owners. And we interviewed in depth about 20 people with guide dogs. And the interesting thing is that they form, of course, a very close bond, as you say, with the guide dog. And many people with guide dogs found that the dog could anticipate where they wanted to go. For example, one man said that he was just walking along with his guide dog one day, and then he remembered that he'd got an appointment at the dentist the next day. And he was thinking about the dentist, and he found the dog sort of rounding a corner, and he just sort of automatically followed the dog, and he found himself at the entrance to the dentist's. The dog had felt him thinking about the dentist, had taken him there a day early because he'd been thinking about the dentist. It's surprising how much we still don't know at the beginning of the 21st century in areas where it's of real interest to millions of people. And I hope that we will actually find out more. And if any of you know students who are studying animal behavior who are looking for projects to do for a master's thesis or an undergraduate thesis, think about experiments with animals. It's a really, really interesting area, and there could be all sorts of really good student projects in this area too.
Well, Rupert, time to stop. Thank you very much for a fantastic talk.